Thank you, Susan, and also thank you, Bob, for reaching out to me so much so that we can make this happen. My name is Peter Wood. I joined the Middleborough Historical Association as a volunteer in 2016. I mainly just wanted a way to learn more about my local community and have a kind of a role in how that history got passed on, how that history got told. In 2017, our members elected me to the board of directors. We had just enough seats open that I ran unopposed. Our president at the time, Doug Van Tran, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, really pushed to say that, hey, you could actually do this, and I think you would have a good voice on the board. In 2018, I graduated from Bridgewater State. I was an English major with a minor in geography and Spanish. And then in November of 2018, our president and vice president were up for election again, and Doug once again recommended you should run for vice president. And that would look better than having the former president just move back to vice president and have it be kind of like a revolving door. And I thought about it for about a week, and I came back to him and said, I think you're right, I could do this. And so I ran for vice president, was the only one running again, and I got in a landslide. That lasted about a year. On November 15th, I stepped down November 15th of last year, I stepped down from the board so I could focus more on applying to graduate school, which I'm hopefully going to start this fall. And without further ado, let's get cracking. So this talk will be on how to engage kids, teens, and young adults in local history. When traveling around New England, I found that local historical societies across the region are really struggling to attract new members, not just young members, but even older members as well. In the long term, it hurts our organization's most reliable source of revenue, but more importantly, it really frays our ties to our own communities. It is our most pressing issue in that virtually all other problems that a society may face can come from this. However, even amid what many societies may see as their twilight years, there are still a lot of success stories out there. For example, Taunton's Old Colony Historical Society has the resources to attract professional employees and speakers. They have also introduced a program called Passport to History in an effort to tie together museums across the Old Colony region of southeastern Massachusetts and to get them to coordinate more on programming and even raise more awareness about how much history there is around here. The Long Plain Museum in Acushnet, which is supported by the local historical commission, is able to provide free entry to its museum and charter shuttle buses from local schools to its annual Apple Peach Festival. Elsewhere, groups like the Old Bridgewater Historical Society have managed to collect professional volunteers, fostered in part by the local university, and generate publicity with newly unveiled items that are crucial to the town's founding. They actually, I believe this was in 2018, they uncovered the deed, the signed deed that gave the greater Bridgewater area over to the English. These success stories, in each case, have found themselves integral to their community by building a strong mutual relationship with the local government and schools, or by providing training and resources for students. The reasons behind a historical society's struggle with students often have less to do with the individual interest in history or local culture, and more to do with education policy and a town's ability to meet student needs. How one society can play a part in meeting student needs depends heavily on their age group, background, class, as well as how local history ties into the curriculum. The fact that I know so many people my age who are interested in history should really bode well for the field. So I ask, why do so few of us participate in organizations like this one? And that's the question that we really hope to get to the heart at with this. So to understand how historical societies can meet student needs in every grade, we first need to take a glance at the Massachusetts curriculum for history. In 2018, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education updated the Commonwealth's History and Social Science Framework, giving us the first new standards for preschoolers to high school seniors since 2003. Despite this, neither MCAS nor the new PARCC exams require testing in history or any social science. On one hand, this gives educators more flexibility in how they teach. On the other hand, it may leave history classrooms with fewer resources compared to English or math classrooms. After all, social science programs that go beyond expectations could be seen as taking away from precious time for students to prepare for these tested subjects that they need to do well and to graduate. To provide some perspective on the disparity between tested subjects like English and math and non-tested subjects like history and global languages, we can look at the state's updates, at how often the state updates their curricula. At this time, the English and mathematics frameworks have been updated 5 times between 1995 and 2020. Meanwhile, history has undergone 3 updates, and students continue to learn global languages and health using frameworks written 20 years ago. Although I did actually just see this week that the health program for this state is actually getting an update this year. This is by no means to suggest that these tested subjects did not deserve updates, nor that a higher number of updates is inherently good for teachers or students, but this is just one metric that hints at which subjects we invest in. Even so, it is also important to acknowledge that the 2018 History and Social Science Framework includes local history. Specifically, it outlines how classrooms can use local history and geography to achieve broader lessons about classroom behavior, responsibility, and democracy. This starts in kindergarten when children are encouraged to compare and contrast the different traditions and celebrations in their hometowns. In Dartmouth, examples could be Christmas, powwows, Pride Month, or related to Portuguese and Cabo Verdean cultures. In the first grade, students are expected to make connections between local places and family, particularly through interacting with maps. They are also asked to think about how the United States is both unified and diverse. Students are then encouraged to think about how they see this reflected in their community. It's not until the 3rd grade when a significant part of the history curriculum revolves around the community. Students are taught to identify local geographic features, understand what their local government is and how people can participate in it. Lastly, students are, one of the newer updates is that students are taught that American Indians have many different nations, tribes with their own languages, practices, and place names. And this is actually, Dartmouth is uniquely situated to teach this lesson because of its place in both Narragansett and Wampanoag traditional lands. It is from here onward that most Massachusetts historical societies, I think, struggle. Very little local history has found its way into classrooms of 4th graders to high school graduates. When the 2018 curriculum does address local life from there on, it happens through the lens of local government, how to participate in it, and how its policies affect the community. If local history is taught at all in high schools, it's advised to take place in electives. And when I went to high school, we had no electives for local history. One takeaway from this new framework may be that local history continues to play a minor role in Massachusetts students' education, and when the subject is present, it focuses almost solely on elementary school students from the era from 1620 to 1790. This may just be repeating what many of you already know about how history is taught. Restricting local history to the period from Plymouth Rock to the American Revolution would really devastate organizations like the Middleborough Historical Museum, whose collections focus on life from the Civil War to the Great Depression. It would certainly hurt urban historical societies like the Lawrence History Center, who have branded themselves around the city's immigrant history. However, as volunteers and local historians, we also understand that history runs through every part of our lives. With that in mind, we can use this curriculum as a sign that local history will play a different part in each stage of students' education that can guide how we set up programs. We can arguably be more involved with what elementary school students are introduced to about the communities than with older students. To learn more about what historical societies can do for children in the classroom, I spoke to a professor of geography at Bridgewater State University, James Hayes Bohannon. It may seem strange to ask a geography professor at the college level what nonprofits can do to teach history at the elementary level, but hear me out. Just like local history, geography is a subject that receives little focus in schools and has few programs. But Dr. Hayes Bohannon is one teacher trying to change that. Since 2006, he has collaborated with his fellow instructors to bring a hand-painted 20-foot-tall inflatable globe called EarthView to schools across the state. When asked about broadening the audience of geography and the social sciences, which was his original goal, he recognized that, quote, although we could be bringing the globe to a lot of different audiences, teachers are only going to be able to justify the time if they can make a direct link to the specific curriculum they are teaching. Since geography is an explicit requirement only at the 4th and 7th grade levels, this is the only level at which we are often invited. In other words, EarthView's instructors and administrators have learned that during the last 13 years of running the program, that big changes were necessary to keep it alive and raise any awareness about the subject. While Hayes Bohannon and his colleagues first imagined EarthView as a way to push against a curriculum that limits students' curiosity and educational opportunities, they realized that their surest hope was to lean into meeting the needs of the existing curriculum and making change that way. They realized that I've seen how this can be a really difficult shift for historical societies. The Middleborough Historical Association is known nationally for its collection of Charles Stratton and Lavinia Warren memorabilia, Tom Thumb, Mrs. Thumb. And it's actually to the point where many locals still affectionately refer to the museum as the Tom Thumb Museum. This is very unique branding that kept the museum afloat in the past, but it has also led to local schools assuming that we have no other local history to offer, and we kind of get brushed aside, much less anything that would fit their curriculum. Even as the MHA holds monthly programs, it continues to face an uphill battle to adjust its programming for today's students and to get into the classroom. To work around similar limitations, Hayes Bohannon said, quote, we really take advantage of any exposure we manage to get, whether it be a conversation with a reporter or an appearance on radio or rarely TV. You could say that maybe one benefit that a lot of historical societies have is working with their local public access. So that is one form we're getting on TV. To this day, many of the volunteers I meet at local historical societies are former K-12 teachers. The experience these people provide to societies is invaluable for teaching others how to interact with children, what needs to be done to satisfy the curriculum, and what administrators may look for in programs. In fact, collaboration with K-12 experts does not need to end with students. Historical societies can use their programs to work with teachers to create professional development lectures at local schools. While local historians can provide a history of the town from 1620 to 1790 in professional development sessions, K-12 volunteers and teachers may be able to give other teachers sample worksheets and talk at length about how this history explicitly fits the goals of their classes. As an example, local historians can maybe write a brief 30 to 45 minute program with time for questions that meet multiple curriculum needs. This latter part, meeting curriculum needs, I've mentioned it enough already, I understand, but it should be an explicit part mentioned in promoting these programs. This helps the teacher more easily justify and justify the time in the classroom and keep the program focused. Outside of the class, craft days may help bring students in, work with their hands, express a creative side. Long-term projects like making shadow boxes, for example, can ultimately bring parents to the Historical Society as kids make progress to see their finished art. It is extremely unlikely, though, that children will become regulars on their own at this age. You just don't see the same energy for kids joining historical societies as, a football team or, the Brownies, which, totally makes sense to me. When I emailed this society's vice president, Susan Guiducci, I briefly touched on historical societies reaching out to teens and young adults. I remember her response was that she had not been able to spend much time or attention with high school and college students because as a group they are a tough nut to crack. And for the most part, I do agree. One of the few ways I've been able to get teens involved, or a teen involved with us, is for them to see themselves in history or something that they are already passionate about that they can make their own. I noted earlier that one of the only ways local history can reach the high school classroom is through electives. This is a high barrier of entry for virtually any historical society. And by extension, it suggests that outreach to young adults needs to happen outside of school. Fortunately, there are school districts that support this. Middleborough High School currently requires students in the class of 2020 to participate in 24 hours of volunteer work. That's actually how Middleborough has gotten some high school students interested. Done correctly, this can give students training and hands-on interaction with their history. As an example, maybe you start a group of young volunteers off with some coaching, job shadowing tour guides, or sitting in on genealogy research, if not helping. They can help set up rooms for programs, maintain a museum's grounds and social media presence, help clerk a gift shop like I did. I do not recommend that student volunteers necessarily work unsupervised. For the students, this experience should be about building a connection to the community, applying a vocational education if they have one, and seeing the value of a history degree can bring if they choose to go to college, or just what answers a history can give them. This also shows off the many hats that historical societies wear. We are museums, social groups, small libraries, entertainment, stores, charities. This is less about working independently or devising new procedures for storage. If a historical society wants independent or student-led work, they may be able to fund a scholarship, possibly supported by grant funding. These scholarships could be essay prompts, or they could be projects that would create content for future exhibits. Creative examples could entail filming reenactments of local historical events, or almost like a film club, or proposing future exhibits. In addition to scholarship money, the latter could give students the chance to work with the society to create the exhibit they would like to see about their town. In the long term, these projects can help a small historical society answer questions about the community that long-term members may never have thought to raise or had believed no one was asking. Much of this holds true for college undergraduates. Many colleges and universities have an internship office that can connect historical societies with students. While many institutions have different requirements for employers, Bridgewater State provides a detailed outline of what an organization must do if it is seeking an intern among their students. I don't say Bridgewater State just because I think that would be the best choice for you, or because I'm telling you to do that, but I do think that their program provides a good description of what a lot of schools are looking for. So it doesn't have to be limited to Bridgewater, although they are my example. For their internship program office, they list that the goals of the internship should be 1, to bridge the classroom in the field, 2, to provide opportunities for students to develop professional skill sets, and 3, to increase a student's sense of civic responsibility, learning, and engagement. You may notice similarities between these goals and those that I mentioned for high school students, such as building a sense of responsibility and knowledge around one's community, or learning to apply skills from the classroom to the workplace. The goal to bridge the classroom and the field is one feature that distinguishes the college internship from a high school volunteer. College students are working as interns instead of going to the classroom, whereas high school students still need to attend their classes unless their school offers some sort of co-op education. This means that college internships must focus more on meeting a set of educational goals than high school volunteers. And now we return to the question I began with. When so many people my age are interested in history, why do so few of us participate in historical nonprofits? The number of things, at this point I should say, the number of things that had to go right for me to be able to volunteer in local history are many. I must confess, history is not my main interest. I had transportation to my local museum. I had Wednesday and Saturday afternoons off from work and school. Our president was very charismatic with newcomers and encouraged me to join the board repeatedly. It paid off. My colleagues at the museum also helped me build enough confidence to guide tours, which I was originally really apprehensive with. And I took on some of the work at the museum in the absence of more qualified, more skilled labor, more skilled staff, more skilled volunteers. My example as a young volunteer in local history is in many ways a fluke. And on its own, I don't think it lights a path forward for another generations of 20-somethings at the Middleborough Historical Association. That said, in the last 3 years of volunteering with the MHA, I have learned more about my town, and that how museums operate than I otherwise could have. In that same amount of time, I visited the Alton House in Duxbury, the Museum of Halifax, the Lakeville Historical Museum, the Long Plain Museum in Acushnet, the Lynn Museum, the Mattapoisett Museum, the Sandwich Glass Museum, the History Project in Boston, and the Dexter Historical Society in Maine. My time around local historical societies has shaped how I interact with my town, whether I notice parts of the landscape more often or place names take on a new meaning for me. Most importantly, I now think more deeply about where history comes from and who tells it, and why they tell it. This is a lasting lesson for students at any age because it teaches empathy. When we ask, quote, who tells history and why do they tell it, and look for an answer, we have an opportunity to follow up and ask who hasn't gotten to tell their history and why haven't they? And why aren't they in my history book? The second question is crucial to how historical societies will reach new members. Older residents, I don't want to say past generations because it's not past, and young residents are integral to the survival of our histories and institutions. If our organizations wish to welcome younger members, they must be able to provide answers to some of our generation's questions about who we are now and how we became ourselves. They must show that they can accomplish the goals of the curriculum and give young people a space to understand how the society runs and dig deeper into their questions. As an example, when I actually first joined the Middleborough Historical Association, for the first roughly 2 weeks, the volunteers told me, explore. They said, you know, maybe we'll give you a few cleaning projects here and there, but for the most part, we want you to explore, make sure you know where everything is, dig up something that we don't know about, and show it to us, and then get us thinking about what we can do with that. So digging deeper into their questions could be something like that, or it could be simply showing them what higher education can do, or simply giving them desirable skills that a museum can give, or genealogy research. I imagine that would be really useful. In short, historical societies must be more than just museums, because Dartmouth is already much more than just Dartmouth. And with that, I do have a few maps to show, just to help demonstrate my point. This will take a moment. It's a map of course, Buzzards Bay. But what it's showing is the number of nonprofit historical groups within each zip code along Buzzards Bay and also Martha's Vineyard. And so, of course, the lightest color that is outlined still indicates that there is definitely at least one historical nonprofit in there. Then we get to Dartmouth. I was able to find 3, I believe. New Bedford, that very dark zip code of New Bedford is, of course, as you might expect, where the National Park is and also where the Whaling Museum is, and so many other historical groups. And then further down on the peninsula, you do have Fort Taber and Fort Rodman. And then I know that there are many museums and historical sites in Fairhaven, but I chose not to include them in this count, although I showed them as points on this map. I chose not to include them in the count because they're, from what I understand, they're mainly town-run, not privately run. And I can actually zoom in. I can tell you what the colors on these mean. I only pointed out, gave points to the historical organizations and companies in the old Dartmouth area. So, for example, if we zoom in on New Bedford here, this light blue color that is just above my cursor, that is the Seaman's Bethel. It's a religious location. Moving further out, I can actually bring up the key here as well. The orange sites are places that are run by that are either run by or the base of a historical commission. Green sites, which we see more in Fairhaven here, where my cursor is, those are sites that are mainly used for functions, special events. I believe once we get into summer, Fairhaven hosts some reenactments at Fort Phoenix. Libraries, I colored them in dark blue. Museums are a reddish pink, almost like a rose color. And nonprofits are a much softer pink. Private commercial locations, I colored them in black. I didn't really find too many of those. And then schools like UMass Dartmouth, which has some local history archives, from what I understand, I colored those in a dark purple. So this gives you a sense that Old Dartmouth has something of a history belt, kind of starting in Westport, dividing in North and South Dartmouth, and then kind of recombining in the area around the Acushnet River, and then slowly moving up, where you get the Long Plain Museum and Society of Friends Meeting House in northern Acushnet. And then for another map that I had to also demonstrate my point, we will move further in on just the Old Dartmouth area. Now what this shows is this shows if you took 2 random people from these zip codes, what is the likelihood that they would have the same native language? Darker colors indicate a much higher chance of 2 randomly selected people speaking a different native language. They might both speak English during the day, but when they go home, might speak a different language. And one of the things that really interested me about this is this central part of New Bedford, the level of language diversity, I have to say, I said history wasn't my main subject, languages. So I found a way to work it in somehow. That part of New Bedford is almost on par with Brooklyn for language diversity, which Brooklyn is one of the most linguistically diverse urban communities in the world. And so it got me to think about how much history am I missing out on by only looking at the English side of Middleborough? How much am I missing out when, say, I should confess, this data is all from the 2000 census, so it's a bit out of date now. But how much am I missing out on when about 2,000 or so people in Dartmouth speak Portuguese as their first language? How can I incorporate that community into this history? And of course, when I went to another part that made me think about this was when I went to Acushnet, to the Long Plain Museum. They had on display documents signed by different presidents, reprinted in 4 different languages: English, Spanish, French, and I believe Dutch. So that also I was really surprised just here in this random town in Acushnet. They were working in multiple languages into their display. So this is just one way to show how we can really broaden how we understand history and whose story who we might not be telling, and how we can bring them into the fold. Especially I'm from Cranberry Country around Plymouth, Middleborough. I also found that, of course, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, a lot of the hired labor on the cranberry farms were people from Cape Verde. I did not know that, and I was like, the account I was reading was a man who was the son of these laborers, and he was saying, I don't know how any historical society is going to keep track of us. We didn't write much. We had somebody else write for us. How are we going to get our history written? And of course, he kind of answered his own question there by writing the history. But it got the wheels turning for me. And with that, that is what I have to show.